IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. Hope you're all well and keeping safe. On the podcast today, we take you to one of the earlier colonial settlements of Madras, Georgetown, and unwrap the layers of history, stories, people, and structures that made up the town. Helping us navigate through this fascinating melting pot called Georgetown is Ashmitha Athreya from Madras Inherited, as she shares lesser-known stories of the bygone times in this amazing journey. We're also doing a quick giveaway of some Madras Inherited merchandise that you may want to check out. Make sure to follow the description of this podcast for finding out how best you could stand a chance to win some really cool merch from Madras Inherited. Let's hop onto the episode and find out more about Georgetown now. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Ashmitha Athreya, Trustee and Head of Operations at Madras Inherited. Ashmitha, thank you so much for being a part of the Musafir Stories and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I've been born and brought up in the city, so it gives me immense joy to actually talk about it with you on a travel podcast. I'm Ashmitha, and I, as you rightly said, I am a trustee and head of operations at Madras Inherited. But even before that, I am a resident of the city, and it's a city that I've seen from my birth. I've studied here, so it's a city I've explored through various perspectives. And at Madras Inherited, we are a heritage awareness initiative. Yes, we work towards encouraging dialogues and discourses on heritage, history, architecture, culture, and so many different aspects of the city. The initiative is co-founded by two architects, Tahir Zoeb and Anupriya Subain. And I have been a part of this initiative for over 4 years now. And I lead the walks, I run the work here, and I develop the walks. I kind of do a mix of things here at Madras Inherited, and it has definitely offered me a way to actually look at the city through a different lens.
Wonderful. Really, really excited to be speaking to you. And it's also always delightful to speak to a local because we get their sense of how to go about seeing a place. I think with the name and with the background and everything, we've kind of given away where we're going to today. But do you also want to give a quick overview of the walk that we'll be covering on the podcast today?
Sure, of course. So it's funny because if you actually look up Georgetown on Google, right, with nothing, with just Georgetown, the Georgetown that pops up is the one in Malaysia and not necessarily the one in Madras. That's because it is a colonial vestige, if I can. And it's a name that an area of the city has received as a result of King George V ascending to throne in 1910. Georgetown is town, and it's funny because if I were to ask my grandmom, where she wants to get something in wholesale or something at a very low price, she would just say, let's go to the town and get it. And by town, she just means Georgetown. She doesn't mean anywhere else in the city. And Georgetown is sort of, it's not geographically the core of Chennai, but historically it is the core of the city. And north of Georgetown is where the indigenous settlements of what is today called Chennai, or earlier was called Madras, began. And everything else that you see in Chennai, in photos, in cafes, or whatever new things that pop up on Instagram and all of these social media platforms, are all new settlements in the city. They're more towards the south of Georgetown. Like I said, the walk that we do in this part is called an exploration of Georgetown, the first settlement of Madras. We call it the first settlement because it is the first properly planned, not in a planning perspective, but an organically developed settlement that comes because of the British invasion in 1639. And this town, in fact, was originally called the Black Town, something that you would find in cities like Calcutta as well. A very racially discriminatory way of talking about who lived in that town. But you had Black Town come up, and over the years, Black Town came to become the home for a lot of daily wage laborers, the working class, the heart of the city itself. And it finally, the name was changed in 1911 as Georgetown. The intention ostensibly was to, support or celebrate the king's ascension to throne, but in reality, probably people just wanted to do away with the black part of the name and have, a name that sounded much, much better.
Yeah, for sure. And also, Ashmitha, you just mentioned that this is around 1911 after Prince George, right? He made a visit, and that's when the name change was made. But how long has this settlement been around for? Like, let's say when the British came, like, when does this date back to?
So, George V actually makes a visit to Madras earlier in the early, I think it was 1905. And then in 1910, he ascends the throne, but then the people locally want to rename this town in his honor, and he's happy about it. He sends his words and everything, but he doesn't physically come here to mark that moment. Georgetown, in fact, or Blacktown can date back to the first time the British set foot on Madras, which is 1639. There is actually a little bit of confusion as to when in 1639 they come here. A lot of historians locally believe that it was August of 1639, but it could have also been July of 1639. I say August because we celebrate Madras Day every year on August 22nd. It's off late, it's become this great celebration. It was started by a lot of people involved locally, including late historian S. Muthaya. You had the Malapur Times and Vincent D'Souza coming together. So all of these very eminent personalities come together and they want to celebrate the city and its history. So what was initially, very small event now is fully blown into a full week. So we have a Madras week every year where there are a lot of, walks, talks, competitions, tours, whatnot to celebrate the city. But the town itself can trace its way back to, the early 1639, 1640s is when this town slowly starts developing organically. Largely the natives coming together to see if there are any employment opportunities that could be available because of these foreigners coming to their shores and settling here. The Britishers come here initially and they acquire a very small strip of land, and they start building and accumulating more and more land. And the town that they live in is called, as you can guess, the White Town. But it becomes a fort eventually because they need to protect their conquests. So it's called Fort St. George, the patron saint of England. And Fort St. George today is where the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly sits. And the old Black Town used to be very close to this Fort St. George, and this was erased to ground, and then you had a new Black Town come that was further north. So I would say the earliest you can date it back to is the 1640s.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for setting that context as well. Now, quickly hopping on to the actual walk itself, do you want to give a sense of where this starts out? What should one be expecting as a part of this walk, and how long is the duration of this walk?
So the walk is for 2 hours, and it happens largely in the mornings. This has also become because Georgetown becomes extremely active post 11 in the morning, and the evenings are great if it's a small group and you are interested in immersing yourself in the true spirit and nature of Georgetown. But what you need to also keep in mind is this is the commercial center. This is the wholesale commercial center, so it's going to be peak activity. So for us, the walk, focusing on like a group walk, it starts at 6:30 in the morning. It's for 2 hours, and we start from a place called Dare House, or locally it's is know it as Parry's Corner. So that's the starting point, and two reasons. One is One is that Parry's Corner is a landmark. Everyone knows where Parry's Corner is. Right from the auto rickshaw to anyone you might ask, they know what Parry's Corner is, and it's sort of like a local running joke where you say, "I'm going to go to Paris," but you don't mean the one in France, but you mean the one in Georgetown. So that is Parry's Corner, and it's a proper corner. The buses and everything take a turn right there. The second reason is that Parry's Corner is sort of the edge, because beyond Parry's Corner, if you're looking out towards the east, and in Chennai, it's easy to sort of understand where you are because you just need to figure out where the beach is, and that's east for you. So you look out towards the east, and what really separates you from the sea are these line of shops called the Burma Bazaar. And then adjacent to it runs the local railway line, and then you have the sea. So it helps you establish context as to why we're starting from right there, because those shores at one point in time in history were where the British come and land. They buy this piece of land. So we start at Parry's Corner and we walk towards the west.
Okay, so let's get started with the walk. We actually have some good context to better understand the walk, as well as you make some references and give us some interesting backstory. So really looking forward to that. So we start off, and you mentioned that we start from the Parry's Corner, or also referred to as the Dare House. Do you want to give a little bit of a background about the significance of this point of interest, what one should expect to see here, and then things like that?
Of course. So Dare House, before I get to the name, I want to focus on the Parry aspect of it. So if you were to come to any supermarket in South India and in Chennai, if you want to, you will always find Parry's white label sugar. So it's a very big name in the sugar market, and this is where it traces back to. This is the Parry. Today, the company is owned by Murugappa, which is one of the biggest conglomerate in the country. But Parry is widely regarded by historians as the second oldest surviving mercantile house, a British mercantile house. This mercantile house was began by Thomas Parry. He's a Welshman who comes to Madras. And he comes here in the late 1700s with the intention of setting up his own business house, as did a lot of Englishmen back in those days. So he comes, he sets up his business, and it is a story of starting with something so little and building something so big, and this sort of reflects in what sort of transforms Parry's Corner as well, because he initially starts off his business indulging in a lot of different things. He's sort of like a general store type and one-man general agency offering anything and everything, but he decides to focus on sugar and fertilizers and chemicals and so on. But unfortunately, he dies a little early. He dies in 1824, and most of the business is then carried out by his successors on the foundation that he builds. And it's called Dare House because at one point in time, that particular block of a building used to house very prestigious institutions like the American Consulate, the European Association, and the Madras Chamber of Commerce. And because Thomas Parry as an individual is said to have been embroiled in a lot of debts and things that people did not want being associated with their business, they did not want the name Parry House on their letterhead, so they preferred that it was a much more safer name. And Dare House came to be because he had his most successful partnership with a man named Dare. So it came to be Dare House, and that's a name that they've still preserved. And beyond its history, why Dare House is also important is for its architecture. It reflects an architectural style called the Artdeco style of architecture. And Madras and Artdeco have a very interesting journey because people don't really associate Madras with Artdeco. It comes to Madras a little late. It comes to Madras in the 1930s. And one of the best possible exhibition of this style is in cinema theaters. So you had a lot of cinema theaters of the 30s, 40s built in the Art Deco style. Unfortunately, because most of them were single screen theaters, none of them, really survive to date. Most of them have been, pulled down, something else built in its place. There's like a handful of them remaining, but the most significant public building built in the Art Deco style of architecture is the Dare House, and it occupies a corner plot, so you get to see the very characteristic curves and curvilinear features that are associated with Art Deco. So for these two reasons, it sort of sets the stage as to why Georgetown became so significant from the commercial perspective of Madras's history.
Yeah, for sure. Some very interesting insights there, and I think two themes, right? One can definitely tie back to Madras and Georgetown as well, like you mentioned. If you're going back to it, one is trade, right? Even in the 1600s, when the British came here early on, they came here as a trading company, a mercantile company, right? And I believe textiles was one of the things that out of this area was very, very popular and used to be exported a lot to a lot of places, including Africa, Central Asia, and places like that. And obviously, the British also wanted to get a piece of that, and that's how they started here. Besides the various other things like spices and stuff like that, and also very strategically located, also, right? So that way they got here. But I understand even before the British, they were. We'll probably touch upon this later on during the conversation. But Armenians, Portuguese, like those people had been around for even a few decades or maybe a century before when the British got here. So that way, trade or mercantile activities is one theme that we catch from this. And Thomas Parry, the Welshman, he also came here with that same dream of setting up and being a success here in that aspect. And the other aspect is the Art Deco style of architecture that you refer to as well, right? Something that really kicked off, and obviously you, with the background in architecture, know much more than this, but I understand this kind of set off around the World Wars, that period, and a lot of places. I mean, Bangalore. I am originally from Bangalore, so Bangalore has a few, but Mumbai, Bombay, right? It has a large number of these Art Deco buildings, and one can definitely see those. And I'm glad that even Chennai has this fair share of these Art Deco buildings. So, for somebody who's a connoisseur of architecture and appreciates that, it's a good way to kick off the walk by like focusing and getting to know about these two themes and their relationship with Madras. So thank you for calling out those things, Ashmitha. So having spent some time here at the Dare House, right, and like you mentioned, it's named after William Dare, who was one of the partners of Thomas Parry. Where do we move on next from Parry's Corner or Dare House?
So we move west. So we move along a road called the NSE Bose Road. Which is once called the China Bazaar Road. Now, this is also a phenomenon that has, I would say, in my opinion, plagued Madras, where a lot of roads have been renamed and their original purpose and intention sort of lost along the way. But we move along these stretches of buildings, and the best suggestion would be to not walk along the buildings, because one, they're monumental in scale, so that the scale of the building doesn't really set in if you're going to walk along it. You walk on the opposite side, which is right opposite all of these buildings is the Madras High Court, another spectacular piece of architecture built in the Indo-Saracenic style. You move along the Madras High Court side and you get to see, a very nice panorama of 4 buildings. We started with Dare House. You have the TNSV Bank, which is the State Cooperative Bank building. Then you have what is today one of the LIC buildings, and then you have a State Bank of India building. Why these 4 are important is that they set, you spoke about Art Deco, you spoke about, how you mentioned the World War and, the style coming into different cities in India. And what Art Deco also did is it marked a very certain change in materials. So up until then, building construction would mean predominant use of lime mortar, brick, stone, timber, and so on, right? So when Art Deco comes in, you have a new and modern material like cement and like steel coming in, which offers your architects and engineers more scope for experimentation. They're now able to do things that lime cannot allow you to do, which is, lime is a great building material. So it's not, you're not like providing them with a very exceptional material in that sense, but they are stoked with the possibilities, and you have these buildings that are exploring different styles. And especially buildings like the Tamil Nadu State Cooperative Bank, it sets in at a time, it was built, around the 1960s, 70s. So it is at a time when a lot of Indian architects are trying to understand what their style is, because now they're coming out from the British mold. Most of the Indian architects from the 1900s, they would have studied in England, they would have worked under British architects. So one way or the other, their perception of architecture, their perception of design was heavily influenced by the people that they worked for, their mentors, their teachers, their professors. So now they were trying to figure out, what do I think about architecture? What does architecture mean to me? What style do I want to use for this particular building? So you had a lot of these architects trying to explore, one, their style, yes, but also to understand responsiveness to climate, responsiveness to context, because Madras is a very hot and humid city. In fact, a lot of buildings that came up during the British era took this into account, and you had planning and constructional techniques that suited the local climate. So now you had these new batch of architects trying to work with the same, and you had a lot of modern and post-modern buildings come up. So these four buildings, they are sort of a mix between Art Deco and modernism and postmodernism. So they offer you that insight that, Madras is home to so many different experimentations with architecture. And you get to see not just colonial era structures, but you also get to see these experimentations that architects decided to make with buildings, especially on arterial roads like your NSE Bose Road.
Yeah, it's marvelous, and obviously that's why it's good to kind of understand these things a little bit. Otherwise, if you're just passing through without a lot of knowledge, you may tend to overlook. Although Art Deco is very unique and it tends to stand out, right? While I was looking up about Art Deco and its origins, stuff like that, one of the things I also came across that really surprised me was the use of Egyptian motifs in Art Deco, and apparently this is tied to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb at around that time in the 1920s. So I think if you just go down the rabbit hole, you kind of discover a lot of things that will leave you very, very surprised. But I just enjoy the process of that discovery, and I thought I'd share that with you too. But yeah, this is on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Road that we pass through this stretch of Art Deco buildings, right? Ashmitha, that's where you're covering off all of these things?
Yes, we're still on NSE Bose Road, yes.
Okay. And is there more buildings or things you see here along the road, or are we moving on to the next point of interest from NSC Bose Road?
So yes and no. In the walk, we just walk down, we take a right onto a road called Armenian Street. But again, it depends on what you're looking for in Georgetown, because it offers you everything, right? So if you walk, just to digress a little bit, if you keep walking down your NSC Bose Road, you get what is the market, the heart and soul of Georgetown, and you get to meet the people of Georgetown. Because so far we've been talking about buildings, we've been talking about architectural style, which is all great, but then you people form the soul of any story, and you walk down and you get all of these streets that cater to different needs. I need to make a mention of it, because what is beautiful about Georgetown is each street is known for a very specific product or a very specific service. So say I wanted to buy paper, I want stationery. I know which street I need to go to, which is Anderson Street, and anything and everything, even remotely related to paper, I'll get it on that street. You have streets that cater just to flowers. And when it's Deepavali time here, where people who are fond of crackers, they need to go to a certain street to get them. You have a street that is just for textiles, one that is just for leather. So it's just mind-blowing, because all of these are not streets in a typical sense, they are alleys. You need to have that mindset to be pushed around, to ensure that you're not going to have time to stop, pause, look at everything, unless you are ready to get hustled along the way. But in these streets is where you get to see people who've made Madras their home. Because what is beautiful about Madras is this is a city that not exist before the British came here. Prior to 1639, there was no Madras. Madras is a city that was, I like to call, this is the way I like to explain it during the walks, which is that it is a city that was stitched together by the British, and they picked up these independent villages or towns that were functioning greatly on their own, that were self-sufficient, and they come and stitch all of this together and they weave this town called Madras. So prior to that, you had all of these independent villages, and today, even today, you do find remnants of what used to be a pre-colonial existence. But it's in these alleys that you see the stories of Madras, of people coming to the city from different parts, trying to make their livelihood, trying to make their city their home, and in the process, also contribute a part of their culture, a part of their history, which just makes Madras, a melting pot of all of these different cultures.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with the modernization and everything, it's easy to like miss out on the older parts of the town, right? Like winding roads and markets and people like bustling with activity. Like this has like its own vibe and energy. So something that we should definitely not miss out on. And I think it's a great detour and digression as well, like you said. Thanks so much for touching upon those things as well. And you mentioned that moving on from NSE Road, you actually moved towards the Armenian Street. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yes, so we're now back to our original route. So we take a right from NSE Bose Road and we enter a street called the Armenian Street. So now it's interesting because we speak so much about the British colonization of Madras. We talk about how they've changed the social, the economic fabric of the city. But prior to the British, the very first set of invaders that these shores have seen is that of the Portuguese. So the Portuguese come here easily 100 years before the British, and they invade this small town called, or rather a very flourishing and significant town called Mylapore, which is now a very significant area in the city as well. I mean, the story goes, the story is associated with St. Thomas the Apostle and all of that. But they come here and they build this town called Santome. And today we call that locality Santome. And that's where the Santome Cathedral Basilica is. It's a national shrine and so on. But the Portuguese come here, they settle down, and it is said that the Britishers saw this, the East India Company see this, and they're sort of encouraged by this, the fact that there is another European, invader who has made, profit from these shores, and this further, encouraged them to explore the shores better. But there is, there is another story that says that the man who is in charge of coming to, present day Madras and examining the land and, undertaking the deal, he supposedly had a girlfriend. She could have been a local. She could have been a mestico. Mestico mestiza is the name that is given to an offspring between a Portuguese father and an Indian mother. So she could have been of any origin, but this story goes that he had a girlfriend and he wanted to be closer to her, and that's why he chose Madras. Because in the initial years for the East India Company, it didn't make sense because Madras doesn't have a natural harbor. And what is where it gets interesting is they come here in 1639, but it's only by the 1850s does Madras see a harbor. So, the girlfriend story is what is spread around a lot because of that. But the reason I'm going into all of this is that even before the East India Company come here, you had the Portuguese, and this attracted so many different communities to come settle along the coast, and one of them was the Armenians. Now, with Armenia very specifically, Armenia as a landlocked country, there were a lot of invasions from the Turks, from the Russians, and the Armenian elite would, leave in packs and they would move to different parts of the world. And it is believed that in one such migration, they come to this shore, and even in the Portuguese town of Santome, they were very wealthy, influential merchants. They had a really good monopoly over certain items of trade, over certain parts of the world. And they were a very flourishing community and made a lot of money out of their wealth. But there is not even one instance where in records it's mentioned of the Armenians wanting to conquer anything. It seemed like they were content with trade, and that is what would have brought them to the English town of Madras as well. They would have probably come here for trade, and the fact that they had this entire street named after them is another testament to their wealth. How do you know that? Is that in Tamil, Armenian street is called Aranmanai Teru, and Aranmanai in Tamil means a mansion or a palace. And Aranmanai Teru basically means the street of people who own mansions. So that's how it is written in Tamil, which meant that at one point in time, the street would have been filled with mansions that were owned by these Armenians. Today, none of them remain, as one can expect. Most of them have been sold, changed hands, because the Armenian community at large moved back to their country when Armenia attained independence. But what remains on that street that is, a testament to the community is the Armenian church. Now, this is a spectacular break from whatever we've been seeing so far in Georgetown, because one, it is a church that is set within a high-walled compound. So once you enter, there are different buildings that occupy the site. So you have a belfry, you have the church, you have a cemetery there as well. And the Armenian church here dates back to 1772. And it is, the community does not populate the city anymore, so it's not a church that's been used regularly, but it is still open to people interested in seeing. It's open from 9:30 to 2:30 every day, and it goes through regular maintenance, and all of that is done. It's just beautiful to see the connection that a city like Madras on the east coast of India has had with a country like Armenia, which is again landlocked. And the fact that so many people travel from Armenia, breathe their last in Madras, have been buried in Madras, because the church is filled with graves of different people, and the gravestones are in Armenian. So these connections are what makes it, extremely beautiful to look at from the larger, narration.
Yeah, for sure. And church is accessible, right? One can visit and check out the church.
It's open on, if you're going to go right away, but it's another renovation, but it's generally open from 9:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I also read that, I believe, again, I just found this interesting, is that Armenian Christmas Day is celebrated on the 6th of January. So that's when most of the remaining community also gathers.
Yes.
But it's just that it's different from the Christmas celebrated worldwide. So I found that bit interesting. And the belfry, like you mentioned, right, that is also supposed to be one of the unique kind of features of the church.
Yeah, so it says that one of the bells comes from Whitechapel in London, where the Big Ben's bell and the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia were manufactured. So you have that connection as well.
Yeah, some very interesting connections, and obviously you also see the contrast in terms of the architecture, right? Like you mentioned, we've been seeing different kinds of architecture all along. It's although it's kind of wrapped in history and all of that, somewhere an underlying theme of architecture also follows along the route, which is very interesting. Now, having spent some time here, where next do you move on from the Armenian church, Ashmitha?
So we keep walking down Armenian Street, and the next stop is essentially a non-stop, because there's nothing for us to look at. It's just a parking lot. But this used to be, or rather, the parking lot used to be the headquarters of a very famous company called Binny & Co. Now, along with your Parry, Binny was also a very major player in the mercantile business. And they were known for their khakis, they were known for their textiles. And what Binny is also known for, from, say, a people-centric perspective, is for also inciting the need to have a labor union. Because in Madras, you had a labor union come up as early as 1918. And although Binny & Co. had their headquarters in Georgetown, their mills were, all over the city. And they had one in an area called Perambur, very close to another area called Puliantopur. And they had two mills there. It was called the Buckingham and the Carnatic mills. So it was just called the B&C mills. What is funny is today people know Binny Mills because Binny Mills is where a lot of film shootings happen. So any fight sequence, any grand sets or all of those things that you see in Tamil cinema, especially, you can be almost sure that it was shot at Binny Mills, because it offers that wide expanse of space for you to shoot anything. In fact, Guru, the Maniratnam movie, was shot. A part of it was shot in Binny Mills, the Bombay bit. And you had a Tamil movie called Hey Ram starring Kamal Hassan and Shah Rukh Khan. Parts
Sure.
of it was also shot in Binny Mills. So that's how, all of us growing up knew Binny Mills. We know of the fight sequences, the song sequences, and so on. But beyond that, the history of the mills is rooted in people's revolution, is rooted in, the employees coming together, demanding better wages, better hours, better treatment, basically. And it led to the formation of the Madras Labor Union in 1918. So, unfortunately, what has happened is the headquarters of the Binny Mills, even though it was a graded building, and when I say graded, it's how we get graded in exams. You're given either a grade 1 or a grade 2. So similarly, there is a grading system that is followed, where there is something like a heritage conservation committee that steps in and grades heritage structures in the city. The Binny and Co headquarters was a graded building, but it was pulled down in 2017. And today it's just a glorified parking lot. It's a huge expanse of space sitting right in the middle of Georgetown. And if you've been in Georgetown, and if you are going to Georgetown, one thing you need to remember is you need to have mad driving skills. Otherwise, you can be ensured that your car is going to get a scratch or a dent. I mean, I can't even think about taking a car. A two-wheeler is the safest option, because you can just go in and out and come easily. But yeah, taking a car inside Georgetown is itself a check on your driving skills. But the second thing is finding parking. It's so difficult to find parking inside Georgetown. So any and every kind of spaces like these that crop up, that offer you parking on like a hourly basis or a monthly basis, is a godsend for people who work there, who live there. So you can imagine what a hit this parking lot would have been. But what they've done in the process is they've erased any existence of this company, because the compound, or whatever used to be the compound, used to have these arches. And in a couple of years back, the arches were just filled in with cement, so you could still see the profile of the arches, so you knew something existed. But now what they've done is they've taken away the profile, and they've just put in rectangular grills. So you have so for anyone who is who doesn't know of Binny and Co, who doesn't know of its history, they wouldn't know that this is where the building existed, which is extremely unfortunate, because when you're looking at history, you need to look at it in totality, the good and the bad parts, to understand what went on, and what sort of influence, and what directed the society to be a certain way. And Binny and Co played its role in that. The mills also have gone for a toss. One of them still exists, but the main ones in Perambur no longer exist. There is a township coming in the place. There are a lot of these changes that are happening. So the stop we make in front of Binny and Co is to start this conversation, to understand where we as individuals, as stakeholders, as residents of the city, need to step in and voice out for not just heritage structures, but history and heritage of all kinds in general. And that's what we do at Binny and Co Stop.
Yeah, it is definitely very real problem, right? Of really important historical and heritage structures being wiped out due to the battle between modernization and also the underappreciation of structures like these, right? Right now, I think it's looked as a means for, like I said, acquiring land that's obviously at a premium, especially given the way the cities expand. But at the same time, like I said, there is a need for different stakeholders to get together and try to preserve as many of the remnants and structures as we have as possible. And also reminds me, Binny Mills, right? I believe it's the same organization, or the same company that started the Binny Mills and Binny and Co in Chennai. As also, we used to have this in Bangalore as well. So there too, it was like really tied back in the day to that trend where we saw a lot of mills and huge source of employment being generated through these. So it would be nice to at least try and preserve what is left of it in some form or shape. Also, on a lighter note, you mentioned a couple of things that will get tested when you're in the Old Town part, right? One is your driving skills and the other is your parking skills. I think one other thing that definitely will get tested if you're in Chennai is if you're able to hail an auto ride with the meter on. I don't know if things have changed since then, Ashmitha, but it just gives me memories back. I mean, my early memories are always tied to the US consulate, like going there for my US visa or the work visa or whatever that is, and also my fight with, not fight, but my attempt on like hailing auto rides back in those days and trying to negotiate a fare that works out for everybody in my broken Tamil, right? So anyway, those are the good old days, but I digress, but it's a welcome digression.
No, it's okay, because if things had been the same, you might have gone to their house to get for your visa purposes and not to the one that's on Cathedral Road. So that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I know for sure. But yeah, good old memories. But we were spending time here at the Binny and Co compound that is a parking lot now that you said. Where on from here, Ashmitha?
So we keep walking down Armenian Street. There are a couple of stops that we can make, but we're just going to be walking past them. One is the YMIA building, which is the Young Men's Indian Association building. It's more famous for its hall called the Gokhale Hall, where a lot of freedom and movement speeches, a lot of politics, language related speeches, all of that was held. But we walk a little past it and we take a right. And this right is going to connect us back to, closer to where we started from. So we started from their house, which is at a corner, like I mentioned, right? And we walked along NSC Bose Road. The other road that runs parallel to the beach is a road today it's called the Rajaji Salai. But at one point in time, it's called the North Beach Road. So we're basically trying to get to that road from Binny and Co. So on this road, this again going back to the British conquest, we had two beach roads. We still do, but one of the beach is not accessible to the public anymore. Where we're standing on right now is called the North Beach Road, and you have another beach road, which is the South Beach Road. So North Beach Road today is called Rajaji Salai, and the south one is called Kamarajar Salai. The south one is where you have the famous marina, where you have the lighthouse, the beach that is known to everyone. But fun fact is that the marina is a younger beach. It comes only in 1884. Prior to that, there were not a lot of buildings that were there on that stretch. It was just a big sandy tract of land. What was older or what is older is the North Beach Road. And interestingly, even today, if you go up on Google, and I'm sure it still remains the same, is that if you look that road and if you zoom in, you get the name of the road, right? In Tamil, it still says Vadakku Kadarkarai Salai, which is North Beach Road. But nowhere else you find it. It's just called Rajaji Salai, its new name. And another name it had is the First Line Beach Road, which means that it is the first road to come along the beach. And this was the beach. This was the beach that the people had access to. And when I say people, the members, the residents of our Georgetown. So this was the beach that everyone had access to. This is where they would go in the evenings. This is where they would, spend their leisurely time. You still have a lot of beaches towards the north of the city. If you travel further north, you have the Casimiro beach. You have all of that. That is still accessible. But this whole section sort of becomes inaccessible when the plan to construct a harbor comes up. So 1850s, there is a plan to construct a harbor, and according to British records and reports, the story goes that because Madras did not have a natural harbor, most of the ships, that would transport people and goods would stop about a kilometer away from the shore. And you would use these smaller boats that are called catamarans or katamaran in Tamil, and these masula boats, which would definitely be manned by the natives because they only had the deftness and the skill to do that. They would help transport all of these goods to the shore. Now, the story, according to the British, goes that while this transfer was happening, there were a lot of pilfering of goods, there were a lot of stealing of goods. And what ended up happening, according to them, is that these goods were then, stolen and then sold off, the profit, being pocketed by the people who handled the Masula boats. So they were very particular that, they were losing out on profit. So they were very particular that they wanted a harbor where they could have more control on how the goods were being, landed and taken care of. And it's 1881 by the time, they've the harbor is inaugurated. It's inaugurated a couple of times, but 1911 is when it finally starts to function. But 1881 is considered to be the date. And what ends up happening is when this harbor is constructed, the sea starts moving back. And the harbor itself creates that division between the road and the sea. So no longer is the beach accessible. But prior to all of this, when you could still see the road from the sea, the East India Company, the British East India Company, saw this as a very fruitful opportunity. And later on, when the Crown took over in 1857, they saw this as a fruitful opportunity to literally paint the canvas. They saw these two beach roads as the first impression that anyone, be a sailor, be a merchant, a traveler, because a traveler is especially important because most of the accounts that we have are traveler accounts. So today, most of the Indo-Saracenic buildings, Indo-Saracenic being a style that was birthed in Madras, a style that amalgamates what the British saw as Indian architecture and European sensibilities. It marries these two into an architectural style. So these two roads, the North Beach Road and the South Beach Road, are home to beautiful buildings, purely from an architectural standpoint, beautiful buildings incorporating local materials, imported materials, incorporating constructional techniques that were advanced for the age. And this is where you find the General Post Office, the Metropolitan Magistrate Court, the High Court that I mentioned earlier. You find the Senate House of the Madras University. You find the Presidency College, which is the very first college in the district. So you find all of these important public institutions that came to populate this road. So at one point in time, this would have been the site that welcomed, all of these people coming to Madras prior to rail travel becoming a possibility when sea was the only mode of transport.
Yeah, I think it's very fascinating. I'm sure this is hard to come by, this type of story, this type of background. Where next to? Are there more stops along the way, or like you mentioned, are we kind of heading back towards almost where we started the walk at, Ashmitha?
I mean, if I can humor you, there's so many more stops, but Georgetown is just a never-ending maze. But it's two more. One is the General Post Office that I mentioned. So we come out onto North Beach Road, and if you take a left, you go to your General Post Office, and on your right is the GT code. The General Post Office is one of my favorite structures in the city, largely because I see architecture more from a social perspective rather than from a structural perspective. That's a very interesting way to look at architecture, and for that you do not really need a degree per se. So the General Post Office is interesting because one, it was designed by Robert Chisholm, a very famed name in the Indo-Saracenic study. So he is considered to be one of the best Indo-Saracenic architects. And in the General Post Office, what Chisholm does is he brings together elements from different parts of the city. So Chisholm, as an individual, he seems to have enjoyed traveling to different parts of the country. So he's picked up elements from Gujarat, he's picked up elements from Bijapur, he's picked up elements from Travancore. And in the General Post Office, you see all of this come together. So you see the roof forms resembling that of Travancore. You see a lot of influences from that part of Kerala. And then you see the jali work in the arches from Gujarat. You see a lot of other influences as well. And these all come together very beautifully. And it's a very stately building. And this is where the General Post Office functioned from. And today you have the head post office on another arterial road called Mount Road in Chennai. But at one point in time, this would have been the focal point, and imagine going into such a beautiful, spectacular building to send post. That was sort of the impression that was intended to be created. And the general post office, you walk further down, you get other areas like Roypuram, Washermanpet, Vyasarpadi. All of this important again to Madras's history. But then you go back to where we start from. You have the GT Court or the Georgetown Court. And then you have another building called the which is the headquarters of the State Bank of India, the Madras headquarters. This is, I would say, a really good example of Indo-Saracenic architecture, where you feel like the entrance gateway has sort of been transplanted from an Agra or a Fatehpur Sikri building, because that's how it looks. A lot of Mughal influences in the facade, a lot of chhatris, a lot of domes. You have, brackets, all of these typical elements, arches, and then you keep going down that road. You hit Parry's Corner, and we're back to where we started from.
It's been a fascinating journey. Like you said, we made a full circle, and throughout this we saw so many different aspects of Chennai, and even though we were just in Georgetown, we got a flavor of so many different things within Madras and within Chennai. Do you also want to share with the listeners what are the other walks that you cover as a part of Madras Inherited, Ashmitha?
Yes, of course. So in Georgetown, we have 4 walk routes at present, and it is my opinion that there's still at least 40 more you can do. Beyond the building, it's also stories of the people who were involved in its construction, who engage with the building. So you go beyond. We have a walk in Roypuram where we focus on the fisherfolk community, who are essentially the first settlers of the shore. So we also talk about the Parsi community there. And on that note, Madras is home to so many different communities. You have all of these communities coming here for the purpose of either trade or finding, establishing their livelihood, and they've sort of stayed on over the years. So we have a walk in Roypuram. And the other walks that we cover are across the city. We have walks in Malapur, Triplicane, your traditional historic precincts, and we have walks in areas like T Nagar, which is considered to be a planned neighborhood that comes up later. It comes up in the 1920s. And we have walks along the stretch, the South Beach Road that I spoke about, where we focus only on the Indo-Saracenic architectural style. So we stick to 4 buildings, and we talk about the ideology, the meaning, the essence of the style, and what it intended to create, the kind of impact it intended to have. And then we have a walk on Mount Road, which is an arterial road. So Mount Road is interesting because when Georgetown sort of slowly ceased being the center of the city, people started moving out from Georgetown. All of these big businesses who once had their headquarters in Georgetown, especially on roads called like Broadway, they moved to Mount Road, and they either had a secondary office there or moved their headquarters there. So Mount Road becomes the commercial thoroughfare of Madras after the 1850s. So we focus on that as well.
Okay, very interesting. So a wide variety of walks that one can take part of, and I would certainly encourage people to check out the website of Madras Inherited as well. We'll link that in the show notes along with their Twitter and Instagram handles. A lot of things, interesting things, like I said, walks are a part of it. The team also has a very informative newsletter they sent out, as well as merchandise. So a lot of interesting things you could check out and try to get a piece of Madras with you, right? And while you're in Madras, the best way to do it would be through these wonderful heritage walks. We'll figure out. I'll probably share some more details in the show notes as to how our listeners, also whoever are in Madras, can perhaps be a part of this. We'll do a giveaway of a heritage walk or merch or something to a select group of listeners, so stay tuned for that. But if you're in Chennai, if you're making your next visit to Chennai, if you're a frequent visitor and haven't seen this part of the town, or the town, like your party would call it, definitely make sure to visit Georgetown, and even better if you have a chance to make that trip or make that walk with Madras Inherited. Thanks so much again, Ashmitha, and we'd love to continue following your work and also have you back on the podcast, perhaps whenever you have a new walk or you feel it's worth you sharing with the broader audience. Thank you so much again.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.